This is a video series on the misunderstood dangers of too much iron in the body, and for older people the risk of diseases and early death as a result. This video is about a campaign we've started to try to stop iron from being added to food. Most people think iron is good for you, and iron has been added to flour and breakfast cereals since the 1940s, so you'd think it was perfectly safe. However, this is not the case, and in fact, it has been shown to cause early death in a group of people called hemochromatosis sufferers, who are in fact 1 in 200 Northern Europeans, or their descendants, and we believe affects many more people too, although admittedly to a small effect. And by the way, I suffer from hemochromatosis. Iron has been added to flour and therefore bread and cakes since the 40s, and it was added to breakfast cereals by Kellogg's starting in the 30s, and is now regularly added to all sorts of foods by manufacturers. The reason for adding it was because it was discovered that it was more than 10% of the population had anemia, and this was often young women who were deficient in iron because of the menstrual cycle. In a way, adding iron for everyone was a quick fix, which appears to have helped considerably, particularly at a time during the war when communication of health issues was so much harder than it is today. But no one really understood in the 40s how dangerous too much iron really was. So here we are 80 years later, still dosing a whole population for the purpose of helping a minority. Admittedly, it is 10%. Now, the population have a good awareness of anemia nowadays, and doctors have tests to detect anemia and treat it with supplements and pills. It seems wrong to indiscriminately dose a whole population just for this minority, particularly as the excess iron called iron overload causes disease and shortened lifespan. Meanwhile, Denmark actually banned the addition of iron and vitamins to flour and breakfast cereals in 2004, and other countries like Netherlands have tried to do the same. Germany has banned using iron oxide. This is known as E172 as a food colouring, but there is total inconsistency between countries in this area. Iron is still added to nearly all breakfast cereals and flour, and its derivatives like cakes and pies and other foods like dry roasted peanuts. Iron is in fact a poison at high doses, and even at low doses accumulates in the body, and over a period of tens of years can build up to dangerous levels in the form of ferritin, which then deposits in the organs: the liver, the pancreas, the heart, the brain, the skin, and the joints. I myself have 4 times more iron in my liver than is the maximum allowed because of my hemochromatosis. So this is particularly evident to people with hemochromatosis, as 1 in 200 in Northern Europe, and descendants of those people in other countries suffer from this. But in most cases, these people don't realise they have it. This affects 1 million people in North America and 400,000 people in the UK and Ireland. Although most of these people do not realise it, and diagnosis has typically taken 10 years, the prolonged effect of this results in liver disease, diabetes, heart disease, arthritis, and Alzheimer's. So it's often diagnosed as one of those rather than the root cause, which is iron overload. A Danish study looked at 10,000 people over a 20-year period and discovered those with high iron, measured as high ferritin level, died up to 20 years earlier or more than those with lower iron levels. In other words, iron kills people. Just look at this graph. It shows a very significant reduction in age at death for people with ferritin level over 600. up to 20 years reduction in lifespan. Before I was treated with for hemochromatosis, my ferritin level was 1000. This study was not specific to hemochromatosis. Undoubtedly, some of the people with high iron had hemochromatosis, particularly in Denmark, where the actual gene probably originated with the Vikings. But it is clear that all people can suffer from iron overload and life expectancy can be severely reduced. I have hemochromatosis, and this has caused me to get interested in this. I actually self-diagnosed myself when I did a DNA test of my genes because I was interested in my family history. So why start this campaign now after 80 years of adding iron to food? The reason is only now is it easy to diagnose hemochromatosis, where just a few years ago it typically took 10 years and in most cases was not diagnosed as hemochromatosis at all. It's now a simple DNA test which anyone can do themselves. That's how I found out last year I had it. There were some further tests the doctors did, which ended up with an MRI scan of my liver, which found 4 times the maximum safe level. And also, not everyone with the genes gets the disease, but it's more than 70%, which the doctors say, because doctors don't seem to understand the time effect. It's a cumulative effect over time. So you get the symptoms of the disease as the iron builds up over tens of years. So long as you don't die from something else, you are highly likely to suffer from the consequences of hemochromatosis genes eventually. In a very small number of people, the genes are not expressed and the people don't get the symptoms. As a result of all of this, there has recently been much more publicity about hemochromatosis. In January 2019, there was this BBC article about how big the new threat of the disease was. And in November 2018, there was this article explaining hemochromatosis, with specifically the phrase, it was the most common condition you'd never heard of, and also saying that typically 8 to 10 times more people are undiagnosed than diagnosed. This is changing fast, simply because of the availability of the DNA tests for everyone, and now is the time to make people more aware of hemochromatosis and also what excess iron really actually does to both hemochromatosis and non-hemochromatosis people. It eventually kills both groups, and something needs to be done. There is 1 million hemochromatosis sufferers in the US and 400,000 in the UK, and there are many more non-hemochromatosis people also with iron overload. Iron is the unknown killer of these older people. Support this campaign to reduce this by stopping iron from being indiscriminately added to food. Adding iron to food is particularly an unscientific approach. By giving everyone a dose of iron which cannot be measured or controlled seems crazy when it can be prescribed as pills for those that need it. Furthermore, there has always been a known issue with poisoning young children. The lower the body mass of the person, the more significant the poisoning effect of iron. So even small doses of iron do affect the young or of low mass. For this reason, cereals have pure iron added rather than iron salt, like iron citrate, which is in iron supplement pills. The reason was using iron salt in cereal caused deaths of young children when it was first added, and instead using pure iron, which is absorbed more slowly and effectively causes less poisoning. Does this information not concern parents of young children eating breakfast cereal every morning? For this reason, you should look at my YouTube video, which is on the screen here. It is our belief iron should not be indiscriminately distributed to a whole population because of the issues of a minority of people. Admittedly, it is 10% of the population that have anemia, but it should be recognised as being dangerous to a similar number of people who suffer from iron overload. Another Danish study found that 12.5% of the population had ferritin levels above 300. The value 300 is an arbitrary number which was chosen decades ago. I personally believe it should be actually 150, and you can see from this graph that hemoglobin actually decreases as the ferritin level increases over 100, which is where the hemoglobin level is maximum. This means that even above 150, the number of red blood cells is reduced, and this actually results in being easily out of breath and actually tired, which is the symptom of iron overload as well as being the symptoms of anemia. When I discovered I had hemochromatosis, I found that my ferritin level was actually over 1,000. Video 2 in this series gives more details of how I discovered this and how I've been treated. Knowledge of anemia is now widespread, and doctors can perform iron tests and control treatment with pills where necessary. This approach would also be safer for anemia patients themselves, who also could suffer from iron overload because iron is in their food. And furthermore, whereas anemia does cause illness, it rarely causes death. But iron overload does cause death and shorten lifespan, and this needs to be realised and acted upon. Please support me in the ban of iron as a food additive and all its forms. Also, you'd think that vegetarian food would be extremely healthy and wouldn't have food additives. But here, for example, Linda McCartney sausages have iron oxide added to make their sausages look brown. Iron oxide is far worse than pure iron added into breakfast cereals, as children would absorb the iron far too quickly. This additive, called E172, is actually banned in Germany, but it is allowed in the UK and, as far as I know, in America as well. So this is much misunderstood area, and most health conscious people think that eating food containing more iron is actually better for them. This is true for anemic people, but for the remaining 90% of people it is not true, and the reverse is true. So please support this campaign and use this URL on the screen here to sign the petition to stop iron being added to food in the UK. If someone wants to do something similar in the US, please contact me in the comments. Many thanks.